The pinnacle of law. Sarah Nguyen stood before a packed courtroom, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. At just 28, she had earned her reputation as one of the most promising young attorneys in New York City. Today's victory, a hard-fought win in a high-profile corporate lawsuit, marked a new peak in her rapidly ascending career. The judge's gavel fell, delivering the verdict in Sarah's client's favor. Applause broke out among her colleagues and the clients she championed. The moment lingered as Sarah left the courthouse, the media already buzzing with stories of her intellect and fierce advocacy. Outside, flashes from cameras lit the sidewalk. Sarah fielded questions with calm professionalism. She knew how fickle public attention could be. Back at the prestigious firm Winthrop & Pierce, Sarah was greeted with congratulations and backslaps from her team. Her mentor, senior partner Mr. Hastings, offered a rare smile and a word of praise. What truly warmed Sarah's heart, though, was Linda Campbell's welcoming embrace. Linda, her closest colleague and confidant, had always been there to celebrate triumphs and weather setbacks together. That evening, Sarah's family gathered in their cozy Brooklyn apartment. Her parents' pride was evident as they watched snippets of her interview on the nightly news. Her older brother teased her about finally making the big leagues, while her mother quietly slipped an encouraging note into Sarah's purse, something she'd done since Sarah's law school days. This sense of belonging, of purpose, had always been Sarah's anchor. Yet beneath the surface, the legal world churned with tension. Winthrop & Pierce had strict hierarchies, cutthroat ambitions, and a constant sense that success was as fleeting as a summer breeze. Over post-case drinks in a polished Upper East Side bar, whispers circulated about a pending internal shakeup. Gossip about associates jockeying for partnership, unexplained firings, and the firm's growing list of ultra-competitive clients cast a subtle shadow over the celebrations. Linda, ever perceptive, cautioned Sarah to stay vigilant. Outshine, but don't outstep. They notice everything, she warned with a wry smile. Sarah, though, brushed off the tension. She had always believed that dedication, ethics, and hard work would steer her through any storm. Yet, late at night, alone in her minimalist apartment overlooking the city lights, Sarah reread a cryptic email from an anonymous source. "Be careful who you trust. Not everyone is as they seem." She stared out at the city below, unaware that the day's triumph was not only a career milestone, but also the tipping point that would set much darker events into motion. By the time Sarah drifted off to sleep, the city was already plotting its next move, and so were some of her closest allies. The stage was set, but for now, victory belonged to Sarah, the lawyer who, in the public's eyes, could do no wrong. Hidden traps. The day after her courtroom triumph, Sarah returned to Winthrop & Pierce with a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by last night's celebration. Her name carried new weight, and her responsibilities grew with it. So, it seemed only natural when Mr. Hastings called her into his office, his tone both measured and grave. "Sarah, I have a matter that demands delicacy and discretion," he began. He slid a thick file across the polished mahogany desk, one marked confidential. The case involved Whisper Inc., a rising tech company embroiled in a multi-million-dollar intellectual property dispute. The stakes were high. The opposing counsel was ruthless. Sarah felt a jolt of excitement and a trace of unease. Such cases made careers, or ruined them. Yet beneath the buzz of the office, a chill lingered. Linda approached her soon after, her voice low and friendly. "This one's big, Sarah. Let me know if you need anything." Linda's presence was reassuring, but as Sarah reviewed the file, she couldn't shake off the doubt stirred by last night's anonymous warning. Sarah dove headfirst into the case, analyzing every document and preparing a strategy with meticulous care. She scheduled meetings, conducted interviews, and spent late nights drafting legal arguments. Linda offered gentle suggestions, subtle, almost too helpful at times. Double-check every outgoing email, Linda advised, glancing meaningfully at Sarah's laptop. Opposing counsel will pounce on any slip. Meanwhile, the firm brimmed with tension. Snippets of conversation floated through the break room. Rumors about someone leaking confidential information to rival firms. Clients suddenly shifting allegiances. Internal compliance officers under stress. Sarah dismissed most of it as office drama, but couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. Sometimes she caught Linda in hushed phone calls, her expression unreadable, or exchanging coded glances with other associates. Then, disaster struck. During a critical document review, Sarah discovered that a trove of sensitive files, key to the defense, had gone missing from the firm's secure server. The situation escalated quickly. IT was called in, leadership summoned an emergency meeting, and panic rippled through the team. In the span of an hour, evidence surfaced suggesting Sarah's login credentials had been used to download and transmit the files externally. Accusations came swiftly and publicly. Mr. Hastings' disappointment was palpable. "Sarah, do you have any explanation?" The trust her colleagues once showed turned to suspicion. Linda stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder, voice trembling in mock reassurance. Sarah would never do something like this. But Sarah noticed a flicker in Linda's eyes, a fleeting satisfaction, quickly hidden. The seed of betrayal, once unthinkable, took root. True disbelief and hurt overwhelmed Sarah as leadership notified her she'd be temporarily suspended from the case pending a full investigation. Alone in her office, clutching the red confidential folder, Sarah replayed every recent conversation, every late-night email, every shred of advice Linda had given. She wondered how much of it was genuine and how much had been subtle manipulation. Her world, once neatly organized and brimming with promise, had shifted overnight into a maze of silent threats and invisible traps. For the first time in her brilliant career, Sarah realized she had no one to trust but herself. Fall from grace. Monday mornings at Winthrop and Pierce were normally abuzz with the steady hum of productivity and competitive banter. But today, tension clung to the air. Sarah could feel every eye in the reception hall follow her as she made her way to the conference room. She had been summoned for an emergency meeting, the kind whispered about in bathrooms and break rooms, the kind that changed careers, or ended them. At the long, gleaming table sat the partners, their faces somber and closed. Mr. Hastings looked weary, his hands clasped, knuckles white. The head of IT was present, as well as the firm's compliance officer, their folders thick with documentation. Sarah's pulse thrummed in her ears as she took a seat, the red confidential folder pressing against her side like a weight. "Sarah, there have been some deeply troubling developments," Mr. Hastings began, his tone uncharacteristically cold. The compliance officer outlined the situation. Confidential files from the Whisper Inc. case had been downloaded from her account and illegally transmitted. Digital footprints, her username, access logs, pointed unequivocally in her direction. The evidence appeared damning, mechanical, almost surreal. Sarah's mind raced for answers. She tried to explain, her words tumbling over each other. The late nights, the repetitive logins, delegating tasks, the possibility of her credentials having been compromised. But the faces before her gave nothing away. As the details of the breach rolled out, she saw a subtle shift in the room. Where there had once been respect and camaraderie, now there was only doubt, even suspicion. After what felt like an eternity, the decision was delivered, cold and official. Sarah was to be suspended from all current cases, her building access revoked, and an external investigation launched. Her name would be temporarily removed from the firm's associate page. The news hit with the leaden weight of finality. As Sarah stepped out of the meeting, the whispers multiplied. Colleagues she had mentored and assisted now averted their eyes or offered only tight, perfunctory nods. Poor thing, she overheard in the elevator. Always seemed too ambitious. The office, once a place of purpose and pride, transformed into a gauntlet of barely veiled judgment. Outside the office, the situation spiraled. Within hours, media outlets picked up the story, a disciplinary incident involving a rising star at Winthrop and Pierce. Headlines speculated wildly, insinuating criminal wrongdoing and ethical collapse. Social media seethed with commentary. Armchair critics, opportunistic rivals, and even some supposed friends feeding the fire or sharing gleeful hot takes. Her inbox flooded with messages, some sympathetic, others venomous, most wanting a statement she could not give. Sarah's phone rang incessantly. Her parents, deeply worried, demanded details and struggled to hide their growing doubt. Her brother, usually her rock, asked if there was anything she needed to confess. Among the relentless barrage of news and speculation, even acquaintances began to keep their distance, reluctant to be caught in the blast radius of her controversy. Amid all the chaos, Linda remained conspicuously present, offering tea and quiet sympathy. Sitting together in Sarah's small apartment, Linda would murmur, "You know, this could happen to anyone. Don't worry, I believe you." Yet to Sarah's confusion, Linda also dropped small, offhanded comments that didn't add up. Misinformation about which files had gone missing, odd references to conversations they'd never had, suggestions that perhaps Sarah had been too trusting with her login credentials. Each gentle word, each touch of reassurance, now carried a faint chill. Sarah's instinct, honed over years of legal maneuvering, rang with warning. As her career hung in the balance and her world closed in around her, suspicion began to harden into resolve. Late at night, unable to sleep, Sarah replayed every encounter with Linda, every piece of advice, every shared secret. Was she imagining the inconsistencies? Or was Linda's loyalty only a mask? Sarah realized she could no longer afford to trust anyone's version of events but her own. To clear her name, she would have to fight back, on her own, in a world that now seemed determined to watch her fall. Inferno of despair. The sky over Brooklyn was gray and heavy the morning Sarah received her official termination letter from Winthrop and Pierce. Rain dotted the windows of her apartment, trailing down the glass like silent tears. It should have been a moment for reckoning, shouting, or desperate phone calls. Instead, everything was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional distant siren and the hum of angry voices in her head. She sat for nearly an hour at her small kitchen table, staring at the paperwork. The firm's logo felt alien now, the familiar crisp letterhead bearing news that erased years of dedication and every late night she had given to her profession. Sarah packed her office in silence. When she entered Winthrop and Pierce for what she hoped would not be the last time, eyes drifted toward her, some out of pity, some with open suspicion. Her once friendly assistant barely managed a muttered, "Good luck," and the security guard who once greeted her with warmth now politely shadowed her to the elevators. Her world narrowed to the cardboard banker's box she carried. Framed diplomas, a coffee mug bearing her initials, dog-eared legal texts, and the little note her mom had slipped in days before. Before she left, Mr. Hastings briefly intercepted her in the lobby. His face, usually so steadfast, was drawn and tired. "Sarah, I wish things were different. Let the investigation run its course." He hesitated, searching for the right words. She saw worry in his eyes, but also uncertainty. Had he begun to believe the rumors? The conversation trailed off, unsatisfying and final. Outside, the press had caught wind of her official exit. Cameras were raised, lenses glinting even in the drizzle. "Sarah, any comment on the allegations?" someone shouted. "Are you planning to sue the firm?" Was it really an inside job? Each question felt like a stone thrown through the fragile glass of her reputation. Sarah kept her head down and slid into the back of a taxi, clutching her box so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her phone pinged repeatedly with fresh alerts as the taxi sped away, her name trending alongside words like the true weight of isolation set in that afternoon. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, now felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in around her as her mind circled through memories. Late nights at the firm, shared jokes, the thrill of legal debates, Linda's laughter ringing in her ears. Not so long ago, but now a phantom echo. The sense of betrayal gnawed at the edges of her sanity. Was Linda truly her friend? Was she just another ambitious associate clawing her way up, willing to destroy even those closest to her? Sarah replayed the moments before disaster struck. Linda's guidance during the Whisper Inc. case, small but significant nudges to double-check this email or forward that document, offers to help proofread late at night. Even now, Linda was sending her reassuring texts, telling Sarah to keep the faith and trust the process, peppering her messages with platitudes, but also asking strangely specific questions. Are you planning to hire a criminal attorney? Don't forget the non-disclosure clauses. Why did those questions feel like subtle warnings, or worse, verbal traps? A week dragged by in a haze of dread. The news cycle refused to move on. Paparazzi staked out her building. Old contacts from law school and prior jobs forwarded her headlines, sometimes with a single word, "Wow," "Sorry," or "Guilty," each stinging with its own implication. Freelance journalists hovered on her doorstep. Even her favorite neighborhood cafe seemed to loom with watchful eyes. One night, as thunderstorms rattled the city, Sarah received a subpoena. She was required to appear at a preliminary inquiry regarding the leak of Whisper Inc.'s confidential documents. The letter's language left no doubt. Her legal future was truly on the brink. She stared at the official seal, her mind racing with images of courtrooms, handcuffs, reputations shredded beyond repair. The anxiety became relentless. Sleep grew thin and shallow, invaded by nightmares of courtrooms turning into arenas, with familiar faces rising from the gallery to cast judgment. She questioned everything, every word spoken to Linda, every unsaved draft, every login and password change. She lingered at her computer, scrolling through emails and calendar invites, searching for clues she had missed. And yet, for every sign of betrayal, there was always the shadow of doubt. Was she imagining things? Was Linda truly capable of this? But it was during these nights, when despair reached its peak, that a profound determination began to stir in Sarah. If her loyalty had been weaponized against her, she owed it to herself to fight back. Not just for personal vindication, but for the part of her that still believed in justice, in friendship, and in the sanctity of truth. She knew her profession was vicious, a world where weaknesses were preyed upon. But hadn't she always been the one to outthink and outwork everyone else? On the fourth evening of her suspension, a lifeline arrived, a knock at her door. It was Rachel Torres, an old friend from law school who had built a reputation as a dogged investigator for a legal aid nonprofit. Rachel hugged her without hesitation. "I've been following this mess," she said, voice low and urgent. "Don't sign anything, and don't trust anyone. Not until you find out who really did this. Start by checking the firm's access logs and see if anyone in tech will help you off the record. If you need evidence, get it now before things get buried." Rachel's words were a spark in the darkness. She promised to help where she could and urged Sarah to lie low, document everything, and trust her instincts. For the first time since her fall, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that all was not lost, that there were still allies if she could find and trust them. Armed with a new resolve, Sarah began the painstaking process of reclaiming agency in her own story. She pored over digital trails, recalled odd conversations, and started reaching out to junior IT staff, spinning small stories to see what might shake loose. She mapped out the timeline the firm's leadership used against her and immediately spotted discrepancies between official memos and what she remembered. Everything Linda had said and done became suspect. But Sarah made a silent vow. She would not confront anyone until she had proof, not suspicion. Sarah's world had collapsed, yes, but deep inside the inferno, she was forging something new. Steel-edged resolve, skepticism sharpened into strategy. She no longer cared if people pitied her or stood in judgment. If she could not depend on the system, she would become the system's most formidable challenger. Justice had turned its back on her, but Sarah Nguyen, even in her darkest hour, would not turn her back on justice. And as Manhattan's lights flickered beyond her window, she promised herself she would bring the truth to light, even if it meant walking through fire to do it. The tangled chain. The city pulsed with summer heat as Sarah Nguyen moved quietly along the edges of New York's legal world. No longer an insider, but neither a helpless bystander. Days bled into nights marked by restless energy as she chased the faint leads left in her wake. Every detail from the disaster at Winthrop and Pierce felt burned into her mind. Linda's suspiciously timed advice, the missing files, the anonymous warning. She clung to Rachel's counsel, determined to trace not just her betrayal, but the deeper current she was now certain flowed beneath the surface. Sarah's first real break came from a routine she and Rachel carefully developed, reviewing the logs and metadata from her time at the firm, cross-referencing with backup records a sympathetic IT junior had emailed her late one night. The pattern was subtle but fatal. Bursts of server activity from her account at odd hours, moments she remembered being logged out or away from her desk. And always on the periphery, a secure remote login traced to a partner's private client, shell companies with names she had never handled directly. Rachel, methodical and firm, insisted on patience. "The truth won't matter unless you can prove the chain," she said. "Find the link from Linda to the outside." Armed with that mantra, Sarah began combing through case assignments and client communications, trying to pinpoint exactly who had the technical access and the motive to forge her digital footsteps. As summer deepened, Sarah cultivated contacts in unexpected places. Paralegals from rival firms, temp workers who'd moved through the Winthrop and Pierce document management office, even the late-night janitorial supervisor who remembered seeing Linda in the office long after hours, sometimes accompanying an unfamiliar visitor. Sarah kept her interactions discreet, her questions layered to seem like idle curiosity. Every evening, she compiled her findings, cross-checking the details for consistency. Piece by piece, the tangled chain began to reveal itself. Linda, it turned out, had been working closely with an outside legal consultant, someone Sarah vaguely recalled from a pair of large joint filings, always described as external support. On the surface, the consultant appeared legitimate, but as Sarah dug into public records and social media, odd overlaps emerged. Shared digital signatures between this consultant and one of Whisper Inc.'s principal competitors, hastily created offshore bank accounts linked to both Linda and the consultant, and irregularities in the approval workflow on internal document reviews. The breakthrough came when Sarah tracked down a former IT contractor, Mark Evans, whose short stint at Winthrop and Pierce had ended abruptly, officially due to performance issues. Over coffee in a quiet Brooklyn cafe, Mark admitted he'd felt pressured to ignore certain access requests and to alter security logs for a handful of partners, Linda among them. "I didn't want trouble," he told Sarah, his hands trembling around his mug. "But I saw what she did. They came in after hours and moved things around, spoofed accounts. I walked in on Linda and that consultant in the file room one night. They told me it was just late work, but I knew something was off. It was the testimony she needed, but risky. Mark had signed non-disclosure agreements and was reluctant to go on the record. Rachel advised caution, so Sarah asked Mark if he would simply recount his memory on a private audio recording. "You don't have to be the whistleblower," she assured him. "Just help me prove Linda had the keys." Hesitantly, Mark agreed, and his account, clear, specific, and devastating, became the first concrete link connecting Linda to the external consultant and, by extension, to the rival firm. Sarah also leaned on technological proof. With help from another friendly tech expert, she recovered a shadowy encrypted message relayed through the firm's supposedly secure chat system. The expert explained that while the message itself had been deleted, fragments of its metadata remained. Sender, recipient, and a cryptic summary line reading, "Full document transmission confirmed. Payment to offshore scheduled." The sender's ID had been carefully masked, yet forensic work showed it originated from a device usually registered to Linda's office computer. In the weeks that followed, Sarah built a growing library of evidence. She made multiple backup copies of files, voice recordings, and digital artifacts, storing them in password-protected clouds and on USB drives hidden in her apartment, paranoia that was, in this case, hard-earned wisdom. At Rachel's urging, she even encrypted her personal phone and replaced her email account. "Once you get close, things happen," Rachel warned. "You need every layer between yourself and the people you're chasing." As she dug deeper, Sarah realized Linda hadn't acted alone. There was, in fact, a ring of cooperation. One or two other associates who routinely signed off on suspicious document requests, a middle manager who had brushed aside warnings from IT about unusual account activity, and chillingly, a partner who had fast-tracked Linda's most recent promotion. While none left fingerprints, their shared digital trails coalesced around key dates, always surrounding major deadlines and sensitive litigation, always in the late-night window after most staff had left the building. Bringing down a scheme this intricate required more than circumstantial evidence. Sarah resolved to confront at least one member of the network, seeking a confession, or at the very least, a recorded conversation that might shake loose additional proof. She posed as a researcher, reaching out to Mason, one of the junior associates who had worked alongside Linda. "I'm trying to understand what happened with the Whisper files," she began, careful to sound curious and non-threatening. Mason was nervous, sweating even in the air-conditioned lobby where they met. Sarah subtly suggested she knew about the after-hours movements and the IT cover-ups. Mason cracked, admitting he'd run questionable file transfers at Linda's request. He feared for his own job if her actions were exposed. Sarah left with another crucial audio file, evidence that the theft wasn't a simple one-woman job. It was an operation. Tensions grew. She took extra care walking home at night, cast her gaze over her shoulder, and ensured Rachel always knew her location. The stress was bone deep, the strain unrelenting, but Sarah could see the entire chain now. Linda manipulating both office trust and technical infrastructure, drawing in accomplices with promises of reward or threats of reprisal. Until Sarah was the perfect scapegoat. One night, unable to sleep, Sarah compiled everything: Mark's testimony, Mason's confession, the troves of digital data, and her exhaustive timeline. She sent encrypted copies to Rachel, her trusted outside attorney, and a private investigator willing to verify some of the offshore transactions. "We're not ready to go public yet," Rachel counseled, "but you have enough to force the hand of anyone truly interested in the truth." The chain was complete. In the silent hours before dawn, Sarah felt the old fire return. Determination not only to prove her innocence, but to expose the hypocrisy and rot infecting the entire system she'd once loved. She wasn't naive. She knew reputations could die overnight. But she also knew that even the darkest conspiracies were just chains, links waiting to be broken if pressed hard enough. And so, as the first light washed over the city, Sarah prepared for the next stage, not simply as a survivor, but as a hunter, one who would drag old sins into the daylight, link by damning link. The truth as light. The rising sun painted the New York skyline in soft gold, but Sarah Nguyen barely noticed as she sat hunched over her table, eyes bleary from another sleepless night. Her apartment had become a command center, walls festooned with printouts, evidence timelines, scribbled lists of names and motives. USB sticks and backup drives littered her desk, beside two constantly buzzing phones, one for personal calls, the other a sterile burner device provided by Rachel, who insisted on layers of security. The pieces of the tangled chain were finally assembled, but the most precarious part still lay ahead. Revelation. Rachel arrived early, bringing coffee and a file packed with her own notes. "Everything's ready," she said, voice brimming with cautious hope. "The DA's office has agreed to a preliminary review. They're nervous, but they trust my record. If this breaks the way we think, this could unravel half of Winthrop and Pierce's senior management. But it's not just evidence. They'll want to see if you hold up under testimony." Sarah let out a slow breath. After weeks of insecurity, isolation, and danger, her whole body trembled with a blend of fear and anticipation. "I'm ready. I need my name cleared, Rachel. I need Linda and her co-conspirators to face what they've done, not just to me, but to every honest person they ever betrayed." Rachel nodded, her reassurance steady. "This is more than just about you, Sarah. This is about what the system becomes if people like them keep winning." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for noon in a downtown conference room repurposed for internal investigations. The elevators seemed to crawl. Sarah could feel her heart pounding with every floor. Unlike her previous humiliating summons, this time she entered with a silent army behind her. Rachel, a private investigator, and a court clerk prepared to record every word. She wore a simple suit and no jewelry, her face determined but unadorned. The emptiness was gone from her eyes, replaced by the resolve of someone who had fought her way through darkness just to stand in that light. Linda was already there, flanked by a defense attorney whose smugness barely masked concern. Several senior partners attended, alongside two DA investigators. As Sarah met Linda's eyes, her former friend managed only a fleeting glance before turning away. It was the glance of someone cornered, calculating, already searching for an exit. The questioning opened with routine formalities, but it wasn't long before the temperature in the room changed. Rachel presented their evidence methodically. The server logs, the digital fingerprints, Mark's private recording describing Linda and the consultant's secretive late-night activity, Mason's tearful confession. Each artifact was paired with screenshots, bank records, and even a forensic analysis linking the payments to offshore accounts directly controlled by Linda and the so-called consultant. At first, Linda's legal team objected fiercely, calling the material illegally obtained hearsay, pushing back on technical grounds. But Rachel anticipated this. Every crucial piece had already been double-checked for admissibility, and both Mark and Mason had verified their accounts in confidential depositions. Bit by bit, the bluster faded from Linda's attorney. The DA's investigators took notes, faces growing hard. Sarah had braced for Linda to deny everything, to go on the offensive, but the confrontation, once inevitable, revealed a more desperate foe. Linda's responses became erratic. She shifted blame, stammered through her explanations, then feigned outrage at her supposed scapegoating. "You want to believe her?" she railed, pointing at Sarah. "After what you made her go through?" But her voice cracked, the performance grating against the mountain of facts stacking up against her. Midway through, a key moment arrived. Rachel queued up the digital transcript of the deleted internal chat, accompanied by the metadata pinpointing device IDs to Linda's office. The chilling summary, full document transmission confirmed, payment to offshore scheduled, hung in the room like toxic smoke. Linda's face went ashen. She glanced at her legal team, then at the senior partners before slumping in her chair. A hush settled. Sarah called to speak. Gisaiken explained, clearly and without rancor, what she had experienced. The subtle manipulations, the carefully orchestrated isolation, the expert forging of digital tracks. She described the trust she'd once placed in Linda, and the profound sense of betrayal when she realized how methodical her former friend had been. Beyond her personal ordeal, she highlighted the danger faced by everyone at the firm. Should such corruption go unchecked? Her voice quivered only once, not from fear, but from the weight of regret and her longing for justice to be restored. When all evidence had been presented, the DA's investigators adjourned for deliberations. It was only an hour, but to Sarah, it felt like days. She waited in silence with Rachel in a tiny adjoining room, nerves taut and mind replaying every detail, every potential loophole or ambiguity Linda's team might yet exploit. But the truth, now luminous and undeniable, had a power all its own. Finally, the door swung open. The lead investigator spoke quietly, but his words rang like a verdict. "We are recommending charges against Ms. Campbell and several currently unnamed co-conspirators for conspiracy, fraud, and corporate espionage. Ms. Nguyen, you are cleared of all suspicion." Some of the partners looked ashen. Linda crumpled, her composure breaking for good. Sarah, spent yet overwhelmed with relief, covered her face with her hands and sobbed in silence. The lawyer who had defended so many now finally saw herself defended by truth. News traveled fast. As the initial turmoil abated, the story, this time, the real story, began to ripple through the firm, then the city's legal circles. Journalists who had once hounded Sarah now clamored for an interview, their headlines shifting from accusation to exoneration. Friends who had distanced themselves returned with awkward apologies, and even Sarah's family, tearful and proud, wrapped her in embraces that seemed to sweep away months of doubt and pain. In the aftermath, there were still consequences. Winthrop and Pierce launched internal inquiries, several senior executives resigned quietly or were placed on leave, and the DA promised a broader crackdown on unethical legal practices. Trust, once broken, could never be restored fully. But sunlight had finally pierced the shadows. For Sarah, the victory felt less like triumph and more like release. As she left the hearing, stepping into the golden afterglow of the afternoon, she realized the cost had been extraordinary. Friendships lost, ideals shaken, scars she would carry in her heart for years. Yet if light was painful after darkness, it was also redemptive, a promise that truth, once revealed, could guide her path forward. And in that luminous moment, Sarah understood. Justice is not simply the absence of wrongdoing, but the courage to bring the truth into the light, no matter how long or harrowing the night. Justice restored. The events of the hearing reverberated across Manhattan's legal community like a thunderclap. Even before the formal charges were filed, news outlets splashed headlines. Whistleblower attorney exonerated. Winthrop and Pierce confronts internal scandal. Corruption ring exposed at top firm. For the first time in months, Sarah Nguyen's name was not followed by words like accused or suspect, but rather survivor, even hero. Linda Campbell was arrested before sunrise. The sight of her being escorted out of her high-rise apartment in handcuffs flashed across morning news segments, sending shockwaves through the city's elite. As authorities descended on the firm, several of Linda's accomplices, partners and associates who had operated with practiced impunity, were quietly brought in for questioning. Some tried to flee, others immediately turned on one another. As promised, the district attorney's office kept the scope broad. Not only did their investigation encompass the theft of the Whisper Inc. files, but it also exposed years of document tampering, kickbacks, and the quiet manipulation of high-stakes cases. The secret world Sarah had glimpsed was blown open for all to see. For Sarah, exoneration was a flood of relief mixed with disbelief. The DA's office had issued a formal statement that she had not only been cleared of suspicion, but her dogged collection of evidence had played a critical role in helping them unravel the conspiracy. Winthrop and Pierce, seeking to restore its reputation, extended a formal apology, by email at first, then a half-hearted phone call from the managing partner. There was even an invitation to return to her old role when the dust settled. But for Sarah, the old office now felt as distant as a dream. She declined the offer. Instead, she found herself turning inward, reflecting on all she had lost, the friendships destroyed by distrust, the confidence shaken by months of isolation, the wounds inflicted by betrayal from those she had once confided in most. Yet within that loss grew something else, a deeper empathy, a humility forged in suffering. She was not the same woman who had once bounded up the courthouse steps with the thrill of victory. She was someone tempered, cautious, and, above all, committed to seeing justice not just as an outcome, but as a process that could shape or save lives. Sarah's vindication set off a broader reckoning at Winthrop and Pierce. Multiple resignations and terminations followed. The senior partner who promoted Linda resigned quietly under pressure, while several middle managers faced disciplinary hearings. The board convened emergency meetings, and a compliance review unearthed further ethical failings. For the first time in years, the relentless pursuit of profit was paused to consider the human and moral cost. Firm-wide training sessions, policy reforms, and an independent whistleblower hotline became urgent priorities. Elsewhere, the legal community grappled with its own complicity. Other law firms quietly reviewed their security protocols. CLE panels hosted urgent discussions about the culture of silence and ambition that enabled such betrayals. An emboldened conversation about the stresses and ethical traps faced by associates rippled from cramped break rooms to boardrooms. Sarah soon found herself invited to speak at legal ethics forums and university panels, not as a warning, but as a guide. In the midst of this whirlwind, there were moments of quiet restoration. Sarah's family, once battered by uncertainty, drew her closer than ever. Her mother cooked elaborate meals, slipping handwritten notes of encouragement into Sarah's purse again, like when she was in law school. Her brother apologized for his earlier skepticism, admitting his fear had clouded his trust. Friends who had once evaporated in the heat of scandal returned, some sheepish, some effusive. Sarah met each one with grace but a certain measured reserve, unwilling to let old habits or surface loyalty obscure hard-earned wisdom. Rachel Torres remained her truest ally. Over late-night coffee in Sarah's kitchen, Rachel encouraged her to consider new possibilities. "You could go anywhere, Sarah," Rachel said. "Private practice, public defense, academia. You can help people who have no voice." The idea settled in Sarah like a seed. What if she built something herself, on her own terms, dedicated to the pursuit of justice for the vulnerable and wronged? It felt daunting, even reckless, but also true to her new sense of purpose. One morning, Sarah stood outside an empty storefront near the courthouse. Formerly a small firm, now vacant and shadowed by the city's commerce. The idea of founding her own practice, one built on integrity and transparency rather than pedigree or profit, began to take shape. She envisioned a team that would fight for people like herself, those scapegoated by systems where the powerful could too easily exploit the diligent, trusting, or simply unlucky. She reached out to former colleagues, law school classmates, and a handful of junior attorneys she'd mentored, offering them a vision that felt radical. A legal practice rigorously honest, fiercely client-centered, and constantly vigilant against the culture of betrayal she'd survived. Meanwhile, the community around her began to respond. Clients who had walked away in fear returned, eager to be represented by the woman who had faced the fire and lived. She received handwritten notes of gratitude from young attorneys across the city, some blunt in their confession. "Your story reminded me why I went to law school." A group of law students she had guest lectured sent her a card, each signature a testament to the silent solidarity she had inspired. The press, ever hungry for a new narrative, demanded interviews. Sarah obliged selectively, always returning the focus to broader issues: legal ethics, systemic reform, and the importance of building cultures of trust rather than competition. The headlines now read, "Nguyen's New Crusade, Justice for the Unheard," and "From Scapegoat to Advocate, Lawyer Rebuilds Reputation by Reforming System." For once, Sarah found herself not just vindicated, but an agent for change. Behind closed doors, she admitted her scars were real. Sleep did not come easily. Flashbacks to the worst moments of the scandal left her shaken. Yet she found renewal in work and in community, drawing strength from the truth she had finally brought into the light. On the anniversary of her exoneration, she organized a gathering in her new office. She invited her team, family, Rachel, and a handful of former Winthrop and Pierce associates who had supported her quietly during her darkest days. The mood was celebratory but not boastful, more like a vigil for what had been lost and a toast to what might now be possible. At the end of the evening, Sarah rose to speak, her voice steady and sure. Justice isn't a single victory or a courtroom drama. It's the patience to endure the storm, the courage to trust again, and the resolve to ensure no one walks through fire alone. The applause was warm, but Sarah knew the work was only beginning. With justice restored, she felt emboldened for all the battles ahead, not just for herself, but for all those waiting in the shadows for someone to believe them, someone to fight. And so, Sarah Nguyen stepped into her new chapter, not only with her name cleared, but with her purpose renewed. At last, both justice and hope restored. Wounds that won't heal. In the weeks and months that followed her public exoneration, life resumed its outward rhythm for Sarah Nguyen, but beneath the surface, she grappled with deep, lingering scars. Justice had been restored, her name cleared, and her place reclaimed in the legal community. Yet it quickly became apparent that victory did not erase the pain she had endured. The ordeal had changed her, inside and out. Some wounds, she realized, would resist even the healing power of truth. At first, Sarah attempted to return to normalcy with quiet determination. She poured herself into building her new law practice, assembling a team of bright, passionate attorneys. Their energy buoyed her spirits for long stretches, and she discovered satisfaction in fighting for clients who lacked the power and privilege to defend themselves. But late at night, alone in her modest apartment, Sarah struggled to silence the anxiety that had become a constant companion. The trauma of her public disgrace flared in unexpected moments: the flash of a camera outside her office building, a notification ping from a journalist's email, the tightness in her chest whenever she entered a conference room. Even supportive conversations with former colleagues or friends sometimes carried barbed undercurrents: curiosity about how bad things really got, or awkward reassurances that everyone knows you are innocent now. Sarah met these moments with visible composure, but inside often felt a cold ache of disconnection. Sleep did not come easily. Most nights, Sarah would toss restlessly, haunted by dreams of betrayal in the marble corridors of Winthrop and Pierce. In her nightmares, faces swirled, Linda's pleading eyes morphing into calculating cunning. Mr. Hastings' voice, stern and unfamiliar, echoing accusations he had never truly made. News anchors spinning her humiliation into entertainment for public consumption. Even positive memories, her early triumphs, the camaraderie of late-night trial prep, were now tinged with doubt. Had any of it been genuine? Or were the seeds of betrayal always present, growing in the shadows of her ambition? She soon realized that trauma was not linear, and recovery least of all. Certain days she would wake with a sense of possibility, ready to bury the past with work and newfound purpose. On others, she barely left her apartment, staring at the skyline and wondering how many others hid wounds that would never quite close. Simple joys, her mother's pho on a chilly night, a walk along the East River, a shared laugh with Rachel, were both balm and bitter reminder of all she had risked and nearly lost. One persistent struggle was rebuilding trust, both in others and in herself. The betrayal she suffered at Linda's hands had left Sarah suspicious, always scanning for ulterior motives, second-guessing every offer of help or friendship. She questioned her own judgment. How could she have missed the signs, the subtle manipulations? She grew more guarded with her team, keeping professional boundaries high. Sometimes, when a staff member worked late or lingered over a sensitive file, Sarah felt a pang of paranoia. She would check logs, scrutinize digital trails, then reprimand herself for her own lack of trust. Rebuilding her sense of discernment, knowing when to trust, when to verify, and how to forgive herself for being deceived, became a daily, silent battle. Her relationships with family posed their own challenges. Though her parents and brother were steadfast in their support, the cracks of old doubts occasionally showed. Her mother fussed over her, always asking if she was eating, sleeping, taking care of herself. Her concern tinged with the unspoken fear that another disaster could strike at any moment. Her brother, repentant after his initial skepticism, became fiercely protective, sometimes stepping in uninvited to intercept media requests or attempt to shield her from firm-related gossip. Sarah appreciated their intentions, but sometimes wished for the lightness they had all once shared, before anxiety and trauma laid claim to their interactions. Socially, Sarah found herself pulled between a longing for connection and a reflexive instinct to retreat. Invitations to networking events, lectures, and even casual dinners flooded her inbox, but most met a polite decline. She felt the weight of scrutiny even now. Some people sought her out as a curiosity, the lawyer who toppled a giant, while others tiptoed around any mention of Winthrop and Pierce as if afraid to catch her misfortune. A few friendships, however, deepened through adversity. Rachel, of course, remained by her side, their evening conversations a haven of candor and dark humor. A handful of former associates, those who had quietly supported her when the tide turned, became trusted confidants. Together, they shared not just war stories, but the ongoing work of healing from a profession and a culture that could be as treacherous as it was noble. The cost to her identity was perhaps the deepest wound. For years, Sarah's self-worth had been bound to achievement, to winning cases, breaking barriers, earning respect in a cutthroat field. Now she faced days when her accomplishments gave her little comfort. She questioned, who was she beyond her reputation? Was she more than her pain, or would this story always define her? Gradually, she came to accept that part of the answer lay in transformation. If suffering was inescapable, resilience would have to be chosen, again and again. Sarah found a form of therapy in writing. Late into the night, sometimes unable to sleep, she filled journal pages with memories, raw emotions, and the lessons hard-earned by betrayal. She wrote letters she would never send to Linda, to her former colleagues, even to herself as she had existed before the fall. She began framing these reflections as essays on legal ethics, offering to guest write for professional publications. To her surprise, the discipline of articulating her inner struggles helped transform pain into meaning, and her honesty began to resonate. She received thank you notes from younger attorneys and law students. Some shared their own stories of injustice or burnout, their gratitude a quiet affirmation that Sarah's wounds, though slow to heal, had become a source of light for others. Over time, Sarah learned to view her scars not as deformities, but as reminders of what she had faced and survived. In the vulnerability of her wounds, she found space for new strength, a resolve to protect, to advocate, and when necessary, to forgive. Her practice continued to grow, gaining a reputation not just for brilliant casework, but for empathy and uncompromising integrity. Still, certain memories lingered, stubborn and raw. Some wounds, Sarah accepted, would never fully vanish. It was the work of living, not erasing the past, but carrying it. Letting the ache of loss become the measure of what matters. Compassion, truth, and the fragile, vital trust that binds people together, even in a broken world. And so, Sarah pressed on, healed, but not unscathed. She moved forward with the faith that courage is not the absence of wounds, but the ability to walk forward, marked but unbowed, determined to build something new from everything she had lost. A new beginning. Autumn arrived in New York, painting the city's trees in hues of bronze and gold as a gentle, bracing wind swept away the last remnants of summer. For Sarah Nguyen, the changing season felt profoundly symbolic. The chapter of surviving scandal and its aftermath was giving way to something quietly audacious. The act of building life and hope anew. Setting up her own practice in the modest storefront near the courthouse was a daily lesson in humility and resilience. No longer did she stride past panels of glass emblazoned with a top firm's insignia or command instant respect from associates eager to curry favor. Her new office's sign was hand-painted, the furniture a hodgepodge of donations and thrift store bargains. But each morning, when Sarah unlocked the door, opened the blinds to admit the sunlight, and brewed coffee in the tiny kitchenette, she felt a stirring sense of ownership and gratitude. Her clientele grew steadily, if unpredictably. Gone were the days of defending corporate titans in high towers. Instead, Sarah's waiting room filled with small business owners wronged by giants, workers in wage disputes, the immigrant community who heard there was a lawyer who spoke Vietnamese and Spanish and who would listen without judgment. Sarah saw single mothers, wrongfully evicted tenants, survivors of workplace harassment, none glamorous, all deserving. Some paid only what they could, others brought treats from their kitchens in lieu of retainers. Every client, Sarah realized, brought their own story, and in a way, their own wounds. Her approach to law had transformed. She met with clients over kitchen tables and park benches, stayed late to research precedents for those who'd once been invisible to big firms, and trained her staff, many of them brand new attorneys or paralegals recruited from overlooked backgrounds, to value integrity over victory. "We win by telling the truth," she reminded them often, "and by never letting someone go through what I did, alone and unheard." Those early months were marked by chaos and challenges. Bills piled up, and some nights, Sarah lay awake asking herself if her idealism was simply naivete by another name. But then, a grateful client would send a heartfelt note, or a junior attorney would speak about fighting for a cause rather than a bonus, and the doubts would quiet, replaced by the resolve that had carried her through every storm. Rachel Torres remained a steadfast presence, now an official partner and mentor within the growing team. She managed the most complex investigations, handled pro bono appeals, and became Sarah's sounding board. Together, they shaped the firm's mission statement, one that centered around fairness, accessibility, and accountability. Their reputation spread. Nguyen and Torres became synonymous with gently fierce advocacy, especially among those who had nowhere else to turn. In the midst of her new beginning, Sarah found space for reconciliation. She made an effort to reconnect with those who had either supported her quietly or faltered when her scandal broke. At a late autumn gathering in her office, an informal open house to thank her friends and allies, she was joined by her family, Rachel, and even a handful of former Winthrop and Pierce associates. Over homemade spring rolls and glasses of wine, laughter echoed in the once bare rooms. The conversations wove together grief and celebration, memory and renewed hope. For the first time, Sarah felt the full scope of all she had endured and all she had gained. Her family, too, began to heal. Sarah's mother hung a lacquer painting above the front desk, a burst of bright color meant as both blessing and shield. Her father, reserved by nature, helped keep the books and quietly introduced local business owners to his daughter's firm. Her brother, long racked by protective guilt, became a willing babysitter for the children of clients when needed. At home, Sarah made peace with the rhythm of solitude, learning to tend a window box of herbs and practice mindfulness on the fire escape, letting go of the need to chase perfection. Yet Sarah accepted that rebuilding was as much about honoring wounds as celebrating victories. She sat with her team through their own growing pains, panic attacks before big cases, tears after losses, the exhaustion of pushing against ingrained injustice. "What happened to me," Sarah confided one evening, "doesn't make me wise, but it makes me believe that every one of us matters, even when the system says otherwise." Her vulnerability gave others permission to trust, to heal, and to risk caring fiercely, even when it hurt. By winter, the firm had become both refuge and launchpad for those drawn to its purpose. Law students sought internships, hoping to learn something real about justice. Community organizations partnered with Nguyen and Torres for outreach, legal workshops, and local advocacy. News media occasionally highlighted their cases, always with cautious respect now, no longer the exploitative feeding frenzy of the scandal's darkest days. Sarah welcomed the scrutiny but viewed publicity only as a tool to bring more help to those in need. She grew into her new role, less the star litigator, more the quiet architect of change. She celebrated modest victories, saving a tenant from eviction, securing back pay for underpaid workers, seeing a survivor of harassment stand up in court. Each win mattered. And when setbacks came, Sarah did not falter. She reminded herself, and her team, that justice was rarely swift or simple. But it was real, hard-won, and absolutely worth pursuing. At the close of the firm's first year, Sarah organized a small celebration in the office's cramped back room. Her parents were there, as was Rachel, and the staff, each carrying a dish, a memory, or a hope. They shared stories of the cases and the clients who'd changed them as much as they had advocated change. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah rose with a quiet smile and lifted a glass. "To new beginnings," she said, "to the grace to learn from loss, to the courage to trust when trust has been shattered, and to the hope that justice, real human justice, can grow from broken ground. May we never stop fighting for each other, and may none of us ever have to fight alone again. There was laughter and applause, more joyful and genuine than any accolades Sarah had received in her former life. She looked around, at her friends, her colleagues, her family, and for the first time in years, she felt the peace of peace earned, not given. Stepping outside that night into the brisk city air, Sarah saw her own reflection in the dark window. A woman both scarred and strong, no longer running from the past, but moving resolutely toward the future. The city lights flickered, and the world felt, if not whole, then at least open, a canvas where healing, justice, and hope could be painted in bold, persistent new strokes. Sarah Nguyen understood at last. Every ending is a kind of beginning, and this one, she knew, was truly her own.